So you can all see the slider over there. So welcome everybody to Virtual Flight Club. This is the third round, and today we are joined by Mr. Kulawat Wongsaroj, who is joining us from Thailand, from Bangkok. Welcome, Kulawat.
Nice to be here.
Awesome. Kulawat, so as I said, you're based in Bangkok, and Klaus, I know that you like to go to Bangkok. You guys have spent quite a bit of time hanging out together. Can you tell us a little bit about what you've been doing in Bangkok? How's your collaboration working? What are you doing together? This kind of stuff.
Okay, maybe I'll start by just introduce myself a little bit. I'm again Kulawat Wongsaroj. I'm currently, simply put, I'm an agile coach, but I'm not sure it's that simple because I'm still find it hard to tell my mom what agile coach really is until now. So. But anyhow, I think we that's where am I right now. And my background before coming to be a coach, have a little bit on the technical side and also on the business side. Right now, I'm running my own consulting firm called Living Consulting, and that is where I met Klaus a few years back. Besides being a consultant, I'm also like to organize a class in Thailand, so I get to meet a lot of people and got certified along the way. So I'm got certification in Scrum, Kanban, Safe, Less, or you name it, just to explore what's going on. And Kanban is where I met Klaus. I think this is, I don't know, 6 years ago, quite a long time. And
it was 6 years. I just looked it up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's for some reason either he liked to teach in Thailand or he liked Thai food, so he come every year.
Or maybe he just likes Thai people.
Yes, hopefully.
Oh.
Yeah.
So in one of the Kanban class, I still remember till now that Klaus said something in the class that quite, I was surprised to hear that. I think this is probably 4 or 5 years ago. He said that Kanban is never meant for team.
Yeah.
At first, I was like, at that time, my mind still pretty much focused on the team's context. Either you choose Scrum for the team or use another Kanban for the team. And for some reason, that phrase kind of open up, like, oh, there's a lot out there more than just the team context. So that led us to where we are right now.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was basically my understanding of Kanban. I hope, yeah. Let's see if it's still a proper understanding of Kanban. I don't know, whatever proper means.
We will see. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. So we have a topic for today, and the topic is improving business agility with flight levels. So I want to kind of kick off with a little bit of an introduction. So there's a lovely quote that I found. It says, "You can't solve problems with the thinking you used to create them." And I'd like to just ask at the start, what is different about flight levels? What is it about flight levels that kind of resonates with this statement, or maybe even doesn't resonate with that statement?
Okay, I'm still trying to crack to understand that saying, but to me, let's see if this relates to the question that you answered. I mentioned a little bit about all this scaling framework, right? That out there, there's a lot of them, and at first I came across Spotify model because it's just public in the internet, right? And then I attend SAFE, and then I actually implement SAFE to some client as well. Then took less class, so I get to see a little bit of this thing. And one thing that I at least I have a conclusion to myself is that this thing maybe they work in some context. When Spotify they use their model to build a company, it works for them, right? And when Dean Liffingwell, he implements SAFE and use in some context that he write a case study, it work in that context. But a lot of time when I work with the clients, we all seem to want to find a shortcut that, okay, this work, and can we implement it here and make it work? And just, have a checklist to implement it. And a lot of time I find that's not the right way to go, and it's often lead to failure basically. And so I kind of came to a conclusion myself and in my company that you need to find your own way to more or less like a discovery process to find your process on what works for you. And what I find unique about Fly Level is allowing me to discover my own framework. So that's the difference. It's not like a thing that you implement, but it's more like like Klaus said, it's a thinking model that helps you think and find your model.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I think thinking model sounds really like how I like to phrase it, or how I like to explain flight levels. It's not like, okay, do these 5 steps and the reorganization and everything will be fine. I think it's a way too easy answer for solving complex problems, and that's the problem I have with so many frameworks actually. So for me, yeah, as you said, it's a thinking model, and it helps you to figure out what works in your specific context actually. So there's no blueprint solution.
Yeah, cool. I like that. Awesome. So Kulawat, in the sort of run up to this, we were discussing an article that you wrote recently, and then decided to rewrite in English so that we could share it more broadly with some of the folks in the rest of the world. The article is called Fixing Your Broken Agile with Flight Levels, if I remember correctly. I'll paste a link in the chat, but we'll also share it out in the, sort of the show notes afterwards. In there, you mentioned specifically there were 4 problems that were quite common in Agile transformations. Can you tell us a little bit about this and kind of where does this idea come from? And yeah, just explore it a little bit for us.
Sure. Just usually I talk about these 4 problems a lot when I talk to my client, but this time is a bit different because I have Klaus with me too. So actually the reference is from Klaus. He's the one who come up with this quite nice of this 4 summary, which is in my article, I kind of mentioned in a typical Agile, in the traditional Agile transformation, it's kind of, I don't know, it's strange to put it there. You know, it's traditional Agile transformation, but I've seen it a lot about all this. The problem, first one that we tend to see is we tend to look at the structure. Everyone just want to, for some reason, they want to change the structure first in the hope that it will make a change to the process or to the people. And actually, there was a question about one particular popular model called Spotify model. Now that we mentioned it, the question was posed in Agile 66 is a Agile forum in Thailand. The people, a guy was just asking, why is it so popular? Why everyone just jump into this model? I was thinking a little bit, and I think maybe because it's one of the first model that kind of on public, and it's easy to understand. So people kind of jump to it and say, oh, maybe we can try that. But a lot of people when they copy it, they didn't do like copy and develop or adapt to fit their own. They just want to make it work right away, and apparently it doesn't work. So a lot of traditional Agile transformation is like that, and to make it worse, maybe there are quite a few big consultants out there right now try to push this model like a template of best practice. And I've seen it everywhere. Even in Thailand, there's quite a few big companies that start to adopt this advice or template, and sadly I haven't seen anything work so far.
I saw this a bunch coming from Spotify, because a lot of people were sort of, we're doing tribes and squads and guilds, and are we doing it right? And I would sort of say to them, well, if you rename the shape or the color or whatever of the box on the org chart, I'm not sure how much difference this is making. What else did you change? And if they have some other things, then usually we see some effects. But if you just rename the parts, I don't know, minimal effect in my experience. Sorry, Klaus, you were going to say something.
So I just want to add one thing. I think the interesting thing about the Spotify model is or not only the Spotify model, whenever you change the org chart, you see change, because people are in different offices. We have new rituals, we have new meetings. So it looks like something fundamentally changed here, but not necessarily actually. And there's one thing, Cliff, this Spotify model, so it's based on 2012 or so, right? So
the original paper came out then, yeah.
To work for Spotify a couple of, oh shit, my internet connection is not working. I'm having some troubles here. Okay, that's good. So I just want to ask you one question, Cliff. So you used to work for Spotify a couple of months ago, or still, right? So
a month ago.
How do you, as a Spotify guy, a couple of months ago, how did you, as a Spotify
18.
person, observe this? 18, okay.
So, I mean, I think there's a lot of things, and I've done a couple of conference talks about this to try to unpack this in a bit more detail. But the main thing is that, like, what is described in the papers was not everything. There was so much more. And really what I would say is the main thing is that we want to keep iterating and making improvements. So the idea that you can sort of design an org structure and then leave it for some period of time, to me, doesn't make so much sense. Like, you want to, you know, every day you're working with it, you're seeing something new, and maybe you're not making changes every day, but at least every couple of weeks, every few months, rather than waiting until, you know, 2 years where it's really expensive and a huge change, you know, making it in kind of smaller gaps and smaller goes. And the reality was that Spotify was quite different to a lot of that stuff in practice. You know, you can anything about an organization more than 5 people. You're going to have to leave out some bits. You're going to, you know, have difference in different parts, and different people see things differently. So that's kind of the reality of it. So yeah, this question about the org chart, like, to me, it makes a lot of sense, because I think often what happens is people see the chart and they go, well, we'll move this thing from here to here and then everything will be fine. But we're looking at kind of who reports to who, rather than how do we work together in like a network structure that says, okay, we need a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of this to make the thing that the customer wants. But we're doing that with 7 different things that customers want, or 7 different customers want different things. So how do we handle that? And that's not usually solved in an org chart, in my experience.
And just want to add one more thing. To change the org chart first, it costs a lot of money. You know, because in some transformation, I heard they want to rent a new buildings to put all the people together. And, you know, after, if you imagine if you're a big company that spend a lot of money on that and you didn't see any result, then what happened? And this is a real story. In some company, they stopped talking about the word agile. Agile is like a taboo word. You cannot talk about it anymore. Quite sad.
Yeah.
I think I've seen that. And so, like, my advice often is to say, well, you know, let's consider when we would use a structural change in the organization, but it shouldn't be the first go-to, because it's about the most expensive way to solve a problem inside a company. So, you know, it's a tool that we can use, but maybe not for every problem. So, yeah. Cool. So then there were another few things that you talked about in the article. So you mentioned, and we can maybe just tackle them kind of as a group here, but like no end-to-end management of the value streams, no strategic or agile strategic portfolio management, and no agile interactions between teams. Maybe we can unpack that a little bit. What's important about these?
Okay, maybe I'll try the end-to-end one first.
Sure.
I think typically, I think this is, if you come from IT or development background, you see this immediately, right? You know, implement Scrum, everybody's happy. But when we say everybody is pretty much in IT, you know, now you find a more efficient way to work, and you might get lucky. You have a PO from a business side, and then you expand your horizon a little bit to some representative from the business, but at the end of the day, you still couldn't reach where the requirement of where need come from, and you still couldn't reach, you know, like the person or who actually deliver the value to the customer, like the infrastructure.
It's disconnected somehow, yeah.
Right. I used to about 10 years, not 10 years, 5-6 years ago, I worked in a big offshore company here in Thailand. We're doing Scrum. We were really excited. We deliver stuff every 2 weeks, but our software sit idly in the operation is in London actually for like 6 months. So really, you know, it doesn't really matter how much you put into your development work. So it's almost useless at the end of the day.
Cool. Klaus, anything to add?
Well, yeah, I guess that's the hard one, and I think we understand it quite well how to improve, let's say, the downstream. So like in operations, and to get faster. Exactly, to get faster into operation. So we have continuous everything, continuous deployment, continuous integration, continuous whatever. And the hard part is actually the upstream, I think. Because in the upstream, we are, there are also people working just to figure out what we are actually doing. And if you take a look at the upstream in insurance companies or banks or like very traditional organizations, it's a mess. So, I don't know, 2 years and then start working now and be finished tomorrow is kind of the expectation. That's strange.
Yeah.
Well, to add to that, I think most of the time when I help the client, you know, do agile implementation, if it initiates from the IT side, it's kind of quite hard to get, at least for me, to get to see some real value, real successful case. But if it got initiated from the business side, it's quite different story because they drive it pretty fast and they know what they want. So which is quite amazing. In a lot of time that, you know, I spend a lot of time working through the IT department, and we spend years and years that we got stuck somewhere. It doesn't move anywhere, and it's just kind of dying down a little bit. But if we start from the business side, just find that end-to-end stream if you can find it, and then you pretty much you get the value very quickly because they know what they're doing.
Yeah, it helps to have focus on a few things rather than on everything.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. So we've talked about some sort of common pitfalls and challenges that companies are experiencing with agile transformations. Can you tell us a little bit about how does Flight Levels help with this? Like, what is Flight Levels doing that's maybe different, or what's special? How does it help?
Okay. First, in Flight Level is it's not a big bang approach that, you know, you have, or even tailor down approach. You don't you have a bunch of practice and then you select and pick it somewhere, but you kind of like look at where you are and you just let's start from the current structure, but you find where this value stream or where this end-to-end value stream, and you start to implement from there and grow from there. So in Flight Level, the way I look at it, there's two key elements of Flight Level that make this work. I call it visualization and interaction, which if you think about, you know, a Scrum or Agile that we know of, it's been with Agile for a long time, right? Interaction basically is like a regular meetings. If you work in Scrum, you have this sprint planning, sprint retrospective, or this sprint demo. It's a regular of thing that you do it to make it a ritual. So you make it work in your own way. And you also have visualization to help you interact better. But in Flight Level, it kind of expanded, not just limit to just the team. But you can make it work at team level pretty much with Scrum. But in order to scale it out to reach the end-to-end part, you can take the same concept of this interaction and visualization and expand it to make it work across the value chain. So that's one of the main difference in Flight Level.
Yeah, and I think it's not like you said, it's not like a predefined approach. You need to come up with your own solution. And so you mentioned the visualization, and there's a question regarding Flight Levels architecture. So one thing is to visualize actually the work that's going on. So we can build a board or something like this, and this board manages the I don't know, the interactions of one product, service, or multiple products or services across multiple teams in the organization. But we even start earlier when it comes to flight levels with the visualization. So we even visualize the, let's say, the interaction patterns or the interaction map kind of. So that's the flight level architecture. So in Kanban, for instance, you learn how to build a board. That's good good knowledge to have, right? But my first question when I get to an organization where, I don't know, 1,000 people are working there, my first question is not how do I build the board? My very first question is what boards do we actually need? So who needs to coordinate with whom? And that's what we call the flight levels architecture. So we try to somehow identify what are the best end-to-end streams, if we still pick this topic end-to-end stream up. And based on this, we somehow take a board as an interaction point where different parts of the organization meet and have their agile interaction in front of this board data. And the cool is, you do it without reorganization. So we were just talking about reorganizations. There's no point in doing a reorganization to, I don't know, product teams or stuff like this, if I somehow manage my products on a board, or it doesn't always have to be a board, but across across multiple teams. So the point I want to make, it's two different things. So we visualize the work across teams, but with the flight levels architecture, we actually come up with what are the visualizations and the actions we need in our organizations. Yeah.
Yes.
Well, to add to that point a bit, so I imagine most of us right now that in this course probably, you know, having some sort of agile environment in the organization, right? We have a lot of teams, and we probably see being in a situation that, you know, each team kind of have their own direction. I have my backlog, I have my priority, right? And we will kind of hope that all this conflict will resolve itself. Right? We are self-managed team. We are grown up. You should be able to just talk about it. But there's a lot of time that because of, you know, because no real direction, everyone kind of come up with their own direction and they don't coordinate. What flight level say is that, you know, if you know that you're supposed to coordinate, so we organize or we arrange to make it happen, so it become a coordination point. Because everyone, you think about it, we're kind of busy with our own work and we need to finish, we want to get our job done, right? But we don't see the bigger picture. So this coordination points kind of allow you to kind of zoom out from your environment and look at the bigger picture that, you know, if you do this, it kind of impact the other teams and how you cannot just make that decision alone in your own context. You have to zoom it out and coordinate with other team that in your end-to-end coordination chain and make that decision together. I think that's the key of flight level in the coordination level.
Yeah, I like that. When I was younger, I worked in a couple of different restaurants, mostly as a waiter. It was my sort of starting out in my career. And one of the things that stuck with me is that when you're serving a group of customers at the table, there's some sort of general expectations that you should probably bring them drinks before you bring them their dessert, for example. So if the kitchen is sort of saying, well, the dessert is ready, and the person's going, well, I haven't had a beer yet, you know, not super helpful. We want to try to do things kind of coordinating the effort. And quite interestingly, one of the things that a lot of restaurants use is some sort of visual system, you know, a pile or a note or a piece of paper to be able to show the queue and the order. And you know, you can actually jump the queue and rush an order in order to make sure that one customer has a better experience. And that's kind of the thing that I think about, you know, when I'm doing this with companies. You know, you want to be able to make sure that the customers are happy on average, and that sometimes does mean that, you know, somebody waits maybe a few minutes extra to get their dessert so that somebody else can get a beer because they've been waiting a few minutes already. So
I didn't know that you used to work as a waiter. I know who's serving the drinks in our next meeting.
Yes. Yeah. I have a fantastic story just on that, is that I didn't really drink when I was younger, and I asked the first person I served a beer if they would like ice in their beer. and they looked at me like I was completely crazy.
Come
I
to
now
Thailand.
know
Everybody put ice in their beer.
Yeah.
I would have been fine. That was my problem. I should have been in Thailand. Anyhow, cool. So we've talked a little bit about flight levels and about some of the challenges with various transformations that folks are going through. I want to maybe jump over a little bit to some of the questions. So we have a few questions already in the chat. Maybe if you have an additional question and you'd like to ask it, I'll just paste the link again in a second, but please keep asking questions and continuing with the discussion. Yes, so we'll go with the first one. How do I collect the dependencies necessary to build a flight levels architecture with a group of 8 to 14 people? I'm interested in online and offline workshops. What can you offer on this?
Who shall start? Well, I can give my insights.
Cool.
Well, so first, maybe not everybody knows what a flight levels architecture is. I already spent some words on it, but the basic idea behind the flight levels architecture is you want to somehow see what work systems you actually need, how are they connected, and what agile interactions do you need in order to manage the system. So that's basically a flight levels architecture. And in a flight levels architecture, we also come up with, like we define on what work system, which kind of work is being managed. So probably it doesn't make a lot of sense to talk about tasks on a strategy board. So that's also part of the flight levels architecture. So basically it's a map of all the boards you're going to build in your organization, kind of. And in the flight levels architecture, so we're talking about the dependencies here, you see the dependencies. So how do I start building a flight levels architecture? Well, the very first question is always that I ask the group, what are potential flight level 2 systems? That's the very first question. Potential flight level 2 systems means what are the products, the services, what are you offering more or less to the market? And we brainstorm these different flight level 2 systems. Then I usually build smaller groups and they continue to work on one of these flight level 2 systems in the architecture. So if we know, okay, one group says, okay, the product could be our, I don't know, our flight level 2 systems. Others probably say, no, it makes more sense that we put the processes into the focus or so. So we have different of these potential flight level 2 systems. And in the next step, you're trying to map the teams to the flight level 2 systems. So you have something like a product here, and then you're like, okay, and which team is basically do we need in order to deliver this product to the market? And then you see all the dependencies, because out of a sudden it might be visible that if you are coordinating across products, that one team might be part in, I don't know, 7 products or something like this. This would mean if we say that the minimum coordination that we are going to do in an organization is having a stand-up meeting, that this team shall join 7 stand-up meetings. And then we are like, okay, that's quite a lot in order to manage the dependencies, right? So this would be one thing, or this would be actually my answer to architecture and dependencies. I hope this somehow makes sense, what I'm saying here.
Okay.
Is there something to add from your side, actually?
Yeah, I'm not, look at the question. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not quite clear what the question is, but there's 2 things here that kind of caught my eyes. The first one is dependence, the word collect the dependencies. To me, the dependency here is not so much the dependency between tasks, but it's the dependency between teams, right? So if you know that you have 2 teams that usually have something that you depend on each other, then you put them together to coordinate. And you don't know, you might have more dependency in the future, and I'll have less, but usually because of this team depend on each other, then you coordinate more often. And that's kind of a simple way to look at the coordination part of flight level. And also the other part is 8 to 14 people. To me, that's quite small. probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 teams, and usually you probably have a regular sync up. You could call it flight level, but it's a simple form of flight level. So I'm quite curious about what is that 8 to 14 people? Are they working on the same thing, or they have different teams? So
to build the flight levels architecture. So maybe that's the group that's building the flight levels architecture, but again, I'm not sure. Yeah.
Hanno, maybe you can add some additional context in the chat, and we can expand on it. One thought for me is that if you have a group and the group itself is only 8 to 14 people, maybe you're fine with just a single board to coordinate the dependencies between those folks. That's kind of like my restaurant analogy. We don't necessarily have to have a board to coordinate between the people who are making desserts, the people who are making drinks, and the people who are making main courses. We can, if it's small enough, we just do it all in one place. And maybe people help out across those different specializations from time to time. But at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is focus on the value to a customer, not on keeping individuals busy, if that makes sense. That's sort of a second order thing, if you will. I'm hoping that somehow tries to answer some of the questions.
That's cool.
There we go. We are getting some more information. 8 to 14 is a group of management from different departments. Okay, cool. Yeah. So I'm assuming you have multiple teams then and multiple departments, and you're trying to coordinate the dependencies between those. Whole company is 550. Cool.
That's what I would read. But there's one thing when I read something like 8 to 14 people, which is a group of managers. I'm not a fan if a group of managers is building the flight levels architecture. I'm a huge fan if a cross-functional hierarchy bridging group is building this flight levels architecture. So when I hear 8 to 14 departments, the workshop will probably end up with 20 to 30 people. So you have quite a lot of knowledge in the room, and you can really take good decisions. And this hierarchy bridging and cross-functional teams, that's a term John Cotter likes to. I mean, he's always talking about how's he calling it? The guiding coalition. Yeah, and that's one of my, well, if there's some things that I always do, then it's building these guiding coalitions. So I think that's really important.
I think often people think of silos as sort of between this department and that department, but in reality, it can also be between the people in the team, the middle management and the top management. And those kind of boundaries are things we want to break down as well.
And
cool.
Especially within the management team. I'm not sure if the top management team is a team, by the way. It's usually a group of competitors. So the silos start already quite high up there.
Yeah. Cool. So I will talk.
So just let me add the last bit. So the question here is how do I collect dependencies? So I don't think we really collect dependencies, but we define who's depend on each other and form the coordination. And then you talk about dependency in your coordination, right? Because it might, we might discover more dependency or less dependency. It's not so much about collecting, but bring people that's supposed to talk to each other and bring them together.
Yeah. So it's not like for a project we map out the dependencies and we say, okay, cool, these are the dependencies, here's how we're going to coordinate them. We're saying we consistently have dependencies between this team that builds this service and that team that builds that service. And so we will have a common, once a week stand up between those teams. And that's how we would coordinate it, for example.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So I'm going to mark this as done and continue. The next question we have here, from the same person. Would it help to have categories of the art of dependencies for your people to build their flight level architecture? And if so, which categories? I think this is pretty much related to the first question.
Yeah, so I think, yes, we are talking about the kind of dependency and stuff like this, but maybe not necessarily when you build the flight levels architecture. It's more like, okay, there is a dependency and that's pretty much it. But I'm a huge fan of, for instance, planning for the entire organization the next 3 months. planning meaning like, okay, what are we going to deliver in the next 3 months? And we get a bunch of people in the room. We're like, okay, so what is actually the stuff that we need to deliver? And then we take a closer look like, okay, and what dependencies do we see? And then we probably see like, yeah, here we have a technical dependency. That's a knowledge dependency. So we come up with some kind of dependency map. But I would call this, I don't know, delivery planning or stuff like this. So this is, for me, not part of the flight levels architecture. It's like Kulawat said before, the flight levels architecture is more like the general kind of thing. So we always have dependencies among these groups of people here. And then if we plan for it, we take a closer look at it. So that would be my answer.
To maybe expand a little bit on that, like if the gap or the dependency is something like knowledge as opposed to some work that needs to be passed, that might help you in finding sort of a more longer term solutions to these kind of problems as opposed to just managing the dependencies. For example, having people pair up across teams or embed in another team or something like that can address like a knowledge dependency. But in terms of trying to make it very visible on the board, the type of dependency, I would say basically what Klaus said, like start with focusing on getting the work done. Don't worry so much about, you know, what type of it is or what's the cause of this dependency. It is a dependency and you need to get that thing done in order for the customer to get their dessert after their beer. You know, so that kind of a thing makes sense. Cool.
I think Hannah put up some more information. Like he asked, so you don't visualize the dependencies, teams, and products. So my answer would be you can, but you don't have to. Right? If you think it's useful, then do it. You know, I used to be in the safe implementation that they have this, they call it program board. Basically, it's a dependency board, right? There you have all the string that if you have a sticky note, you have depend on the other sticky note, and you put your string attached. And I see in some context it works, especially when you start doing stuff and people don't talk to each other. It's if you visualize it, then you force them to think about it at once. But once you use it and you know what you know the people, you know the work. Sometimes you don't even have to visualize it, but you know what to talk about, right? So so if it's useful to you, can do it. It doesn't, but you don't have to.
Yeah,
could be a good starting point to see where you currently are. Because I don't find it so helpful, because when people start with these walls and you just see ropes all over the place and you're like, yes, we're fucked. Okay. So, but this doesn't help a lot actually. So,
yeah.
There needs to be some kind of, improvement loop.
Yeah. Cool. So I've marked that question as done. Thank you for the question, Hannah. Both of those that dig deeper into the architecture and how we create it. Cool. So next question we have, do we need to use boards? Is this a rule? And if not, what can I use instead?
Excellent.
I think
Excellent.
if there's a rules in flight level, I remember one rule that Klaus told me. It's that you are allowed to think. He keeps saying that rule, like you're allowed to think. So I think in flight level, there's really, even to me in Agile, there's no must. Like whatever works for you, it works. If it doesn't work, you change it. So my answer would be, you don't need to use the board, but there's a lot of situation that the board actually help. And I'm seeing a lot of time that if you in your meeting, in your coordination, if you don't have any visualization, you kind of talk about it like up in the air. It's hard to focus, and sometimes you forget things, and it's hard to bring the group to focus on the same thing. If you have the board, it helps people focus on what to talk about, and it can have it visualization is pretty powerful. Sometimes it will lead you to think that you never realized before, like, oh, I have a bottleneck here, or stuff like that.
Yeah. I'm wondering if maybe part of the question is around, do we need to use physical boards versus digital or tools, perhaps, as well? It could be that.
Yeah. So whatever works for you, actually. I'm a fan of electronic tools, actually, although I know the benefits of physical tools, of course. Yeah. I just want to expand a little bit more on, do we need the boards? I think I mean, it's always, it depends, yes. But if you say it depends, what does it depend on, actually? So I guess that there is, if we have something like, okay, we have a very complex kind of world here on this side, where we have no freaking idea what's going on. And here I don't know, we are flying a plane, which is highly complicated maybe, but we actually know how planes fly. And I think in both of these worlds, boards don't make a lot of sense, because I mean, if a plane takes off, I don't think that the flight crew is doing some kind of sprint planning. So how could we do our flight to, I don't know, Berlin this day? Let's come up with some sticky notes. Shall I put the start lever, or what shall I do? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. We know how to fly a plane. There are no Kanban boards or stuff like this in cockpits. We have, for instance, checklists, right? It's a good tool if you are in this kind of space. And on the other hand, if you are in this highly complex domain where you have no idea what's going on, you are somehow very innovative and very creative. Well, whenever you write down a sticky note, it's basically wrong what you're writing down 2 hours later. So maybe that's also quite hard to have boards here, but somewhere in between, which is still quite a wide area, boards are really, really helpful, especially what just Kulawat said. You discover things that you haven't seen before, that you haven't known before. So this would be my take on it.
I have a little bit to add here, is that usually a lot of, I got some question about why do we need visualization, or why do we need regular meetings, like, to begin with. If we have a plan and everything's follow the plan, then we don't have a need to meet that often. We just follow the plan. But you know how thing is, and that's why we need agile. Everything changes all the time. I think the heart of flight level is that regular interaction that we coordinate to each other. So to me, I think if we have to choose between interaction and visualization, I will even put more weight in interaction. If you can make the people that's supposed to, coordinate and talk together and make them meet regularly, then they know how to react to what change in their environment. Then you might figure out that you might need some visualization, we might need electronic tools, you may have physical board, but that would help you to coordinate. So still at the end of the day, that the key is to have that regular interaction between coordinated groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
cool.
It's only 10 minutes and there are still some questions.
Yes. So next question we have, how do we signal capacity or WIP that's reached on level 1 towards level 2 and 3 systems? Do we simply have WIP limits on these boards as well?
If we choose to have WIP limits, then we work with WIP limits, yes. But I'm not sure if limiting the working process is always the right thing to do. So it's all about creating focus in the end. So we need to somehow create focus on a certain amount of work, and let's not start new work before we finish something. So, and let's not focus on 100 projects or whatever at the same time, because that's not a focus. So, can someone help me?
So we simply have WIP limits on this board, like what do you say?
If we think WIP limits are good, yeah. Cliff.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the things that you talked about a couple of times before, I talk about a lot when we're building level 2 systems, is this idea of you want to limit WIP where you want to see the improvement. And the idea here is that basically what you want to say is that, are we trying to get faster at doing tasks? Are we trying to get faster at doing projects? Or are we trying to get faster at doing sort of overarching company initiatives or something like that? Because if you're limiting and creating focus on tasks, you will see faster, sort of more focus on tasks, and the lead time will usually come down on that. But at the end of the day, like focusing on tasks is a little bit like my restaurant analogy from earlier. We're focusing on getting people beers and people desserts and people main courses. But what we actually need to do is do them in a certain order. And we need to make sure that the customer is getting all of those things, because otherwise they won't pay and then leave the restaurant to make space for our next customer. And so I think a little bit of that sort of a thing is, I would think about it like, yeah, you usually, when you start out, you're in a situation where you have loaded people at level 1 and often at level 2. And if you can start at level 2 or 3 and constrain and say, this one is the focus. What I like is this idea, and I've talked about this a couple of times, is this idea that, don't let the third item block number 1. So what you want to be able to see, more importantly, is at level 2, we've got number 3 over here, but one of the teams over there is blocking number 1 to work on number 3. And that to me doesn't really necessarily make sense. So we want to try to surface those sort of issues more than try to say, don't do more than 10 tasks at a time, because at the end of the day, 10 tasks may or may not be a good amount. And it probably doesn't matter so much if it's 10 tasks from 10 different projects. If it's all 10 projects, all 10 tasks from one project, that, however, is a slightly different situation. Sven, maybe you can give just some sort of sense if we're sort of answering your question, or if this is helpful in some way. But Klaus, you were going to add something as well?
Well, not so much, but just one thing, I guess. So if you start on a higher level, you can basically derive the focus for the lower level. So for instance, on a flight level 3, we're like, okay, we are not working on, we're focusing, I don't know, on these 4 initiatives or something like this. So let's assume we are working with epics on a flight level 2. I can somehow derive my epics out of these 4 initiatives, but still it's only 4 initiatives. Maybe it's even a lot, but it's already somehow restricted. And on a team level, so maybe we are somehow breaking down the epics into stories or tasks or something like this. If I only get so much epics that we are working on, as you said, if I'm now starting 10 tasks or only 5 tasks, well, yeah, we can discuss about this, but that's not the big lever. So the big lever is to create the focus in the organization. So you need to narrow down the funnel, more or less. That's actually one of the important things, especially when it comes to strategy. So we have a 5-year strategy, and now we come up with some initiatives, and all of these initiatives are of course totally important and everything. But still, if we start working on our 5-year strategy, well, there's no focus at all. So we need to narrow it down. We need to close the funnel, actually. And that's what you're doing from top down, kind of. Yeah, hope this somehow makes sense.
Yeah, I think another piece of this is that very often what I've seen is when you start to visualize at all 3 levels, what you notice is that there's a lot of things happening at level 1 that are not reflected at level 2 and 3, or don't connect to things at level 2 and 3. Stuff that sort of, we just have to do it, or it's business as usual, or it's maintenance, operational work, this kind of thing. I'm curious what the 2 of you think about this and how you've handled that kind of a challenge, because for me it's often this can come from that there's a mismatch. Level 2 is kind of the manager's projects, and level 1 is like all the stuff that the poor team has to try to figure out how to cram in while still keeping the managers happy.
Yeah, and it's quite often the case that when teams are working, it's, I don't know, 10 to 40% is strategic topics from top management, flight level 3, whatever you want to call it, and the rest is just business as usual. And I think it's always a challenge. I mean, when we say business as usual, it sounds like, well, we're not innovative now and so on, but still that's where we are earning our money right now. And if there's in our cash cow a bug or something like this, yes, let's fix it. Right. So, and we don't need a decision on a flight level 2 or flight level 3 to fix this bug. We need to do it. And all the other stuff is like, okay, that's more or less most of the time the stuff that we want to earn money in the future. And you always have to balance these things. So I don't think it's a bad thing that the teams are working on operational stuff. I mean, it's just reality. But we need to somehow balance it. Yeah.
It reminds me of one of my client that, all them in this particular client, their management they sit pretty high in the ivory tower. They don't really know what's going on so much. So they tend to think that we are building a new product, we are building a new product. They even have a cap, a capacity cap that, we shouldn't work on the, that business as usual so much, just like 20%, right? But when we start implementing like Kanban board, a visualization, they start to see the reality. And a lot of people, they kind of got surprised, like, oh, wow, this is so much of the, BAU stuff that we actually, operation stuff that we work on. I think start with visualization and then we can deal with reality. Right. That would help. And we can bubble that up and then we can probably make a better decision once we get to see the real data.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Cool. I will mark this one as done. And then we have probably time for one more, but we will see. Next question is from Don, and Don asks, this is, my company creates many products which sit well at level 2. We deliver products singly and also collectively in solutions. Would a solution also sit at flight level 2?
That sounds like a safe terminology to me. I'm not sure. Solutions.
Solutions. Yeah, I'm not sure what this
So let's say
means.
solution is a collective product, kind of.
Collection of products by the sounds of it, yes.
A collection of products.
Ah, okay. Yeah, then if this is a collection of products, then that's still a flight level 2 problem, right?
Yeah, I would think so. So what's level 3 then?
But yeah, actually, that's a good point. So you can have hierarchies on actually each flight level, but you see most of the time hierarchies on flight level 2 and flight level 3. So flight level 2 could be, for instance, one product. If you have dependencies within one product, you build one flight level 2 board and you manage these products across, the dependencies across this product. However, often it's the case that the products have dependencies among each other. So that's just another layer on flight level 2, where you basically manage the dependencies, or not only everything, across the products. And Kulawat, you were like, okay, and what is flight level 3? I know that you know the answer, but still. Flight level 3 is more like, okay, what are actually the products we're working on, kind of. So it's more it's more the strategic point of view. So it's not like flight level 2 is one product and flight level 3 is multiple products. It's a different thing. We're talking about strategy on flight level 3. Are we working on the right products? What do we want to achieve within the products? So this is basically the decisions on flight level 3. If this makes sense.
I'm wondering if in Don's situation, it's the same folks who are doing the work for both the individual products and the collections. Because if that is the case, I might be inclined to say that it's actually even the same flight level 2 system as opposed to some separate coordination mechanism. I think very often what I've seen is that without bashing any specific tools, people who've been using different digital tools and stuff have made very complicated ways of visualizing and slicing their stuff. And because you have somebody who is a solution manager and someone who's a product manager, you need to have both of those two views into the world. But the reality is that they compete for the same capacity and the same people, and ultimately they go to the same clients. And so what we're trying to do is kind of bring those things together so that we can weigh the options between, do we do this work on this standalone product or this bundle of solutions, and which one should we do first? Because if we're competing for the same capacity, ultimately that's kind of the decision that we have to make.
Yeah.
I hope that's helpful.
That's right, Cliff. That's at least what Don says.
Cool. Awesome. Well, we are coming to, at least on my clock, it's saying 1 minute to 12. So that tells me that it's time for us to wrap up. What I want to do is, before we go, thank everybody who's joined us virtually and live. This video will also be available for watching in a recorded form. It'll be posted out probably in the next day or two. And if you're interested in continuing the discussion with us or joining us for another session, I paste a set of links here in the chat. So you can sign up for additional flight clubs. You can follow the Flight Levels Academy Twitter account for updates on this and other articles that we publish and anything else that's going on in our world. And of course, if you would like to have any discussion with either us as a group or any of us individually, Twitter is probably a good place, although you can find us on most social media. Jump on there. Maybe you have a follow-up question or something you'd like to dig in deeper, or you just want to have a chat. join us, we're totally up for that. Yeah, and thank you all for coming. It's been fun to spend this time sharing with you, and thank you to our guest Kulawat. It's been lovely to have you. Thanks for joining us. And of course, thank you, Klaus, for joining as well. So yeah, thanks very much, everybody. And we will see you again in 2 weeks' time. Awesome.
That's the idea. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Sure.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Yeah. Sawadee krap.